In this video, I'm going to take a look at some of the informal fallacies, so informal logical fallacies. And so, uh, in the previous video, we looked at formal logical fallacies, which is essentially how it goes wrong how an inference goes wrong. And so, in this one, it's more like so I think I said in the last video, this is stuff that sort of appeals to people's emotions, but is intellectually spurious. And so I'm just going to go through the ones here that Steven Pinker went through in his book on rationality, and give just a little bit of background, and talk about each of these, give some examples of them. So the first one here is one that you might be familiar with, which is called a straw man. And so this is posing a person's argument in a way that weakens the argument or makes it sound absurd so as to attack the reformulation that you have made as opposed to the person's actual argument. So it's replacing an opponent's positions with a position that's easier to attack. So these are oftentimes the things that start with, so what you're saying is, and so some of the examples that Steven Pinker gives is this one. Dominance hierarchies are common in the animal kingdom, even in creatures as simple as lobsters. And so the interlocutor might say, so what you're saying is that we should organize our societies along the lines of lobsters. And so you can see how, this is attacking some other sort of position that we should organize our societies along the lines of lobsters, rather than sort of getting at the idea that was actually stated. So this is obviously supposed to make the argument look absurd and so easier to attack. So then there's special pleading, which is sort of replacing your own position with one that's easier to defend. So ESP, extrasensory perception, fails in experimental tests because it is disrupted by the negative vibes of skeptics. Or this is another one that Steven Pinker used. Democracies never start wars, except ancient Greece, but they had slaves, and Georgian England, but the commoners couldn't vote, and 19th century America, but its women lacked the franchise, and India and Pakistan, but they were fledgling states. And so, it's just sort of, sitting here giving all these counterexamples to the thing that you just said. So you're sort of changing your own position. So you started with the position, democracies never start wars. Then you proceed to change your position here. Then we have another sort of version of this, moving the goalposts, or what you might have heard called Mott and Bailey. So when a position is attacked, say the person says that what was attacked wasn't what they actually meant by their position. So when I said defund the police, what I meant was reallocating part of the police budget to emergency responders. So it's essentially you make your statement, defund the police, and then somebody says, well, what if this, that, and the other thing happens, and crime goes up or whatever, and then they say, well, what I meant was, by defund the police, was actually reallocating part of the police budget to emergency responders. And so you're changing the position that you had that was just attacked, by saying that it wasn't what you actually meant. So then we also have the no true Scotsman. So that's when someone points out a counterexample to a proposition and then define that counterexample out of the proposition. So it kind of comes from this right here. So the first person says, no Scotsman puts sugar in his porridge. Then another person says, well, Angus over there puts sugar in his porridge. Then person one will say, yeah, well, then Angus isn't a true Scotsman. And so you're sort of defining, Angus here out of what it means to be a Scotsman. And so one of the examples that Steven Pinker uses is communism and he didn't word it actually this way. I kind of paraphrased here. Communism isn't repressive because no true communist state would ever repress their people. And so, you're trying to sort of uh, define, places like communist China and the Soviet Union and stuff out of communism. You're trying to define those out of communism in order to sort of, I guess, preserve your position on communism, or in this first example, preserve your position on what Scotsmen do. So then there's begging the question, which I kind of went into in the previous video, but here we'll just say, it's assuming the truth of the conclusion in the premises. So in the last video, I used the example of melatonin causes you to sleep because it is sleep inducing. And so this is sort of your premise. Melatonin is sleep inducing, therefore melatonin causes sleep. And so then this one, another paraphrase from Steven Pinker's. I think he used a different person's voice. So if I had Adele's voice, I would sing just as good as Adele. And then there is what Steven Pinker called a tendentious presupposition. So kind of the old joke, when did you stop beating your wife? Rather than the question that doesn't assume that the person beats their wife, which would be, do you beat your wife? It's when did you stop beating your wife, which, implies that the person already was doing that. Then there's this tu quoque or whataboutism, which is pointing out another issue instead of addressing the issue at hand. So that'd be something like, it's been verified that Donald Trump lied about, X, whatever X is. Then the second person responds, well, what about the Democrats' lies, about W, Y, and Z or whatever. And so it may point out a hypocrisy in the Democrats. The Democrats in this example might be hypocrites by, sort of harping on Donald Trump's lies while they tell their own. But it doesn't change the issue at hand. It doesn't change the fact that, Donald Trump lied about X, for instance. And so it's more of a distraction strategy than it is actually addressing the issue at hand. Then there's argument from authority. And so this one is definitely one of those ones that's kind of weird because, authorities tend to be people, experts tend to be people that you're supposed to believe. But when you argue from authority, you imply or even explicitly state that something is true because someone in authority said it. And so I put this here. I don't remember if Steven Pinker put anything like that, but this is particularly egregious if the authority is speaking on something outside their field of expertise. And so we might say something like, so and so many top scientists are atheists, therefore God doesn't exist. And so, it's this idea of saying, well, all these smart people think this thing, and they must be the authority on this because they're smart. And so it's kind of like from the last video, the example of Andrew Yang's platform, where he started his first premise, I think, with the smartest people are saying, that people are going to lose their jobs and all this. So this is one that Steven Pinker actually had. I think he said it was from a bumper sticker. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And so, like I was saying, the argument from authority is kind of a weird one because, as I was saying, we hope, ideally an expert is somebody who is an authority and who we can believe on at least the subject of their own expertise. That's the ideal. There's been a lot of ink spilled lately about, sort of the failure of experts, in places like Afghanistan and things like that, and, how people are becoming very skeptical and suspicious of the experts and all that. But ideally, an expert is somebody that in their sort of field of expertise, you should be able to sort of take what they say as being authoritative. And of course, this isn't, purely true. There's definitely a difference between, say, a scientist who says something, on a blog or, in like an interview on TV or something, and then something that they would publish in a peer-reviewed journal. So, a peer-reviewed journal is supposed to sort of be this process that something goes through where we can say that this thing in here is in fact authoritative and can be, stated as, as a reason for believing something. And you also see this like in criminal trials where if you have like an expert witness, these expert witnesses have to be vetted quite heavily in order to establish that their expertise is actually relevant to whatever issue that they're going to be talking about in the trial. And so we do have these sort of processes and things like that that are supposed to sort of give more weight to authority. But simply arguing from authority, saying that so and so said this, so it must be true, is an invalid way of making an argument, or it's an informal fallacy, is what it is. But anyway, we can then kind of a related one, the bandwagon fallacy, saying that because a certain number of people believe something, it therefore must be true. So this is one that Steven Pinker used. So most people I know think astrology is scientific, so therefore there must be something to it. And then, so this is one that I actually just put here. This wasn't from Steven Pinker's book. So Christianity is the biggest religion in the world, so it must be getting something right. And so it's just this idea of saying, so and so many people believe something, that therefore there must be something to it. You could say the same thing about something like QAnon or something like that, where, well, these so many people think the world is flat or whatever it is, so there must be something to it. And once again, this is one of those things where, like consensus on an issue is always nice. Like scientists having a consensus on like climate change is one of those things that you want to point to as being authoritative. But the idea is that just simply saying that a lot of people believe something is not a good reason. It's not a reason to believe it in itself, that so and so many people believe in it. You would want some other reasoning, but beyond just that a lot of people believe it. And then so we have ad hominem, which is means against person. So it's attempting to besmirch or call into question a person's character as opposed to addressing their position. So these are both from Steven Pinker's book. So we don't have to take Smith's argument seriously because he is a straight white male and teaches at a business school. Or the only reason Jones argues that climate change is happening is that it gets her grants. And so it's supposed to be, sort of saying that because someone is a bad person, or that that there is some reason that I distrust them, that we can sort of just not take anything that this person says seriously. And so this is another one of those things where it's like, certainly there are reasons that if a person is just known to be a liar who has lied about things often in the past and has been dishonest, that, another thing that they said you would want to view with some kind of suspicion. But the idea is that having lied in the past does not necessarily entail that the thing they are saying now is a lie. So, as with a lot of these informal fallacies, you need something beyond just saying, that person is a straight white male and teaches at a business school, so you don't have to take anything they say seriously. You have to show why being a straight white male and teaching at a business school would sort of make it so this person shouldn't be believed on, whatever particular issue is at hand. Then so there is the genetic fallacy, which is a sort of ad hominem against the origin of an idea instead of addressing the actual idea. So this one is from Steven Pinker's book. So that study you're using was funded by a foundation that used to support eugenics. And so a scientific study comes out, and one of the people or one of the foundations funding it, maybe 100 years ago supported eugenics, and somebody is saying that's a reason that this scientific study should be dismissed. So this is one that I put here. So you got that from Fox News, so I don't believe it. And so once again, it goes back to this idea of, you know, maybe Fox News is somebody whose opinions or views you should take with a grain of salt. But just because they have been dishonest in the past doesn't mean that necessarily in this particular case that they have to be wrong. And so this doesn't disprove somebody's point. So you'd have to go beyond this and show why this would actually why this piece of data coming from Fox News invalidates that data. So this is another one that I made. So the Declaration of Independence is bad because Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. And so you can see how the ad hominem and genetic fallacies are very similar. They're both sort of attempting to sort of call into question or besmirch sort of the source, whether that's, the source like where the idea originated, or the source as in the person saying it right now. Then there's guilt by association, which is also related. So it's a mix of ad hominem and genetic fallacy that attempts to besmirch or question a person because of irrelevant, or at least possibly irrelevant, associations. So these two both come from Steven Pinker's book. So Williams's theory must be repudiated because he spoke at a conference organized by someone who published a volume containing a chapter written by someone who said something racist. So this person, Williams, spoke at a conference with the organizer of which published something that had a chapter. Maybe it's somebody who put together like a compendium of essays into a book, and one of those essays just happened to say something racist, or was by somebody who said something racist, and therefore we're saying that Williams is guilty by association, that we can dismiss what Williams said because of this association. And so Steven Pinker also puts this one in there. So the carcinogenicity of tobacco smoke was discovered by Nazi scientists, which was apparently true. And so tobacco companies actually tried to discredit the carcinogenicity of tobacco smoke by calling it Nazi science. And so, sort of trying to take this idea that tobacco can cause cancer and discredit it by saying that, it was discovered by Nazis, that it's Nazi science, that its association with the Nazis somehow automatically discredits it. And so then there is the appeal to emotion, which is the attempt to discredit or advocate, if the case may be, an argument because it causes some kind of strong emotion. So this one was from Steven Pinker. He said, "How can anyone look at this photo of grieving parents of a dead child and say that war deaths have declined?" And as I'm recording this, Russia is invading Ukraine, so I thought a more pertinent or apropos one might be, how can you hear the news about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and claim that war deaths have declined? And, so it's one of those things where it's not actually looking at any kind of objective data. It's just saying, this causes some kind of strong emotion. So, how can you even make that argument? That argument is invalidated by the strong emotions of myself or, some people. And so a related one is the affective fallacy, which is arguing for or against something based on how it makes you or some person or group of people feel. So this would be saying something like, it may be wrong, but it's how I feel. Or saying that that's wrong because it makes me feel bad. And so one that I came up with here is saying, for instance, if there was no God, there would be no objective morality. The thought that there's no objective morality discomforts me, so I choose to believe that God must exist. And so, this is one that you often encounter in apologetics where, people will, and this will, be kind of an appeal to emotions. People will say, well, if God doesn't exist, then you're saying that, that the Holocaust wasn't wrong or something like that. And, trying to appeal to emotion and this affective fallacy. So it's like, it doesn't sort of, disprove one way or the other, that God exists or objective morality exists. It's just saying that this is not a good or valid argument for saying that God exists, is saying that, because of there is no objective morality, that, this would be unpleasant to think about, and therefore there must be a God. And so there was another one that Steven Pinker had that I think I forgot, which was the burden of proof. And so it's just kind of the argument of saying, you can't prove that, this isn't the case. So the burden of proof is on the person sort of making the positive assertion rather than the person who is making the sort of negative assertion. But anyway, these are just some of the informal fallacies that Steven Pinker talks about, and you can find much longer lists of these, dozens and dozens of other ones in addition to these, but these are some of the probably most common ones. And as I've been saying, a lot of these these aren't the same way as formal fallacies, in that a formal fallacy just automatically sort of invalidates an argument and says, this conclusion doesn't follow from that. These informal ones are a little bit more ambiguous, and for instance, I was talking about things like the argument from authority. We do want authorities on things, and we want ideally to be able to believe them, at least in their area of expertise, but simply arguing from authority that, so and so said something means that it must be true is not a good argument. Same with ad hominem, as I was talking about before. Somebody might be a known liar and, dishonest. They might be known to be dishonest, and that should certainly make you, take what they say with a grain of salt and want to sort of confirm it. But somebody having been dishonest in the past doesn't automatically make what they're saying now a lie or dishonest or incorrect or invalid or whatever. And so with a lot of these informal fallacies, there's a little bit of ambiguity and wiggle room on them, but for the most part, these are bad. These are bad tactics or strategies for making some kind of an argument. But anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. I'm sure a lot of you have probably already, heard about many of these different kinds of informal fallacies. They're, they come up quite often in, just people's normal everyday lives. The formal fallacies are fallacies that people might not be as aware of. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble. I hope you found this video helpful and interesting, and I will see you in the next video.